So, the 2015 season was arguably seen as one of the worst seasons in Formula 1 history, with a lack of excitement throughout the season, with the odd race here and there making up for that, and also a lack of a title battle compared to the previous year, even if it did lead to an infamous moment between Lewis and Nico in the cool-down room at COTA. With not a lot of hope surrounding 2016, even if Nico could take the fight to Lewis this time given his strong end to 2015, the FIA along with FOM were looking for ways to try and spice up the race weekend. One of these involved a new tyre rule, where drivers had an option of 3 compounds during a weekend and had to use 2 during the Grand Prix, something that actually worked and is still being used to this very day, and the other, which nobody asked for, as it was felt there was nothing wrong with it, involved a slight tweak to the 3-part qualifying format, which, as you'll see in this video, became universally hated by many F1 fans, with even the FIA going back on this rule not too long later. This is the brief story of the F1 qualifying format that was implemented during the 2016 season. March 4th 2016 is the final day of pre-season testing ahead of the new season, taking place at the Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya in Spain. During the test, it was very apparent that Mercedes once again had the best car on the grid, with them covering the most miles of anyone, with Ferrari appearing to be their closest challengers again, judging from the quick lap times they posted throughout the testing period. How well that assessment turned out to be come the end of the season. But it was during the final day of testing that news would break about a major change when it came to qualifying. Whilst the 3-part knockout format would remain the same, the structure of these 3 sessions would be different, with Q1 being 16 minutes long, Q2 being 15, and Q3 being 14. However, the biggest change would come with how drivers would be eliminated, as after a certain period of time, drivers in the drop zone would get eliminated one by one until the clock ran down to 0 to complete the session. So how it would work is as follows. In Q1, drivers would have 7 minutes to do as many laps as they wanted, but after that 7-minute window had expired, the driver who was at the bottom of the leaderboard would get eliminated. Then, every 90 seconds after that, another driver would get eliminated until the session came to a close. This would be the same process for the other 2 sessions, with the only difference being that Q2 would have a 6-minute window, whilst Q3 would have a 5-minute window. On top of this, the number of cars that would get eliminated from each session would also change, with 22 drivers being reduced to 15 for Q2, with that number being reduced to 8 for Q3. Probably a good time to tell you that there were 11 teams in F1 during this time, something we will have again when Cadillac make their debut next year. When news broke of this change, the reaction from a lot of fans was very mixed to say the least, with many believing that there was nothing wrong with the previous knockout format, with many also believing that the sport should focus on trying to make Sunday more exciting, rather than trying to fix something that wasn't broken in the first place. But nevertheless, the change would be implemented from the first race in Australia, and regardless of people's opinions, there was still intrigue as to how the new qualifying format would work. But by the end of the session, that curiosity would quickly fade into obscurity, and would leave people puzzled and gobsmacked. 19th of March, and the first qualifying session of the 2016 season was about to get underway, with many people expecting the Mercedes duo of Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg to lock out the front row with a sizable gap to the nearest placed car. And whilst that would indeed happen, their pace along with Lewis's 50th career pole wasn't the main talking point coming out of the session. When qualifying got underway, everything seemed to be normal, with nothing seemingly out of the ordinary. Okay, there may have been the obvious sight of many cars coming out earlier than normal, but apart from that, there wasn't anything to suggest that something was out of place. But by the time the 7-minute window came to a close, it became clear why teams were letting their drivers out early. With only a 7-minute window before the first elimination happened, it meant that drivers that were behind other cars coming out of the pits had less time to set a lap compared to everyone else in front. And with traffic being a massive thing around Melbourne, having a window of clear air, along with having enough time to set a competitive lap, was absolutely crucial, especially given when the 7-minute window expired, and for the next 90 seconds afterwards, a driver would be eliminated, regardless of whether they were on a fast lap or not. This would end up catching out a lot of drivers, with both the Manners of Rio Haryanto and Pascal Wehrlein being only able to do one flying lap, whilst the Haasers of Romain Grosjean and Esteban Gutierrez, along with the Red Bull of Daniel Kvyat, would get eliminated whilst they were on a flying lap. Things would only get worse when Q2 arrived, as along with drivers going out early again, another issue would pop up with this format, as many of the top drivers, including the Mercedes and Ferrari duos, would only bag one flying lap in and would sit in the garage for the remainder of the session, thanks to them having a car advantage compared to the rest of the field. On top of this, many drivers were also getting eliminated quickly, with the Renaults and McLarens being eliminated in quick succession, whilst the Williams of Valtteri Bottas would also follow suit not too long later. Then came Q3, and arguably the most complained session of the three. With this format, the FIA, along with the CVC, who little did we know at the time were in their last year of running the sport, hoped that it would lead to a titanic duel between two drivers come the end of the session. But with only 90 seconds to play with, it was impossible for such a scenario to happen, and so after most of the field did one flying lap, with only the Mercedes duo doing 2 flying laps, all the 8 cars in Q3 stayed in their garage for the remainder of the session, with the drivers getting out of their cars with still 5 minutes left to play. This, as you can imagine, led to a lot of backlash, not just by fans, but also pundits, drivers and even team personnel, who initially agreed to this change in the first place, with many calling it an embarrassment to the sport, with them also calling for the format to be scrapped with immediate effect. Even Bernie Ecclestone, in his final year in charge, believed that the new format, in his words, was pretty crap, despite the fact that his own company, the CVC, agreed to this change like the teams did. Despite a vote from the teams to have the format scrapped the next day, the FIA rejected this vote, with them initially refusing to revert back to the previous format. The elimination format was kept for the next race at Bahrain, where, despite the circuit being completely different in its character compared to Melbourne, the same issues persisted, with drivers still being caught out and the fight for pole being completed early with a few minutes left on the clock. This would lead to the same sort of backlash as seen in Melbourne, which in turn led to a meeting between the FIA, FOM and also the teams competing in the championship. In the meeting, the teams failed to come to an agreement on reverting back to the old qualifying format, as back then, every team had to essentially shake hands with each other if they wanted something changing, rather than the system we have nowadays where it only has to be an overwhelming majority. Despite the teams failing to agree on this, they did all agree that something needed to be changed with this qualifying format, as they agreed that these issues couldn't continue to persist for the remainder of the season. In response to this, the FIA set out a proposal to all the 11 teams on a potential new format for the 3-part sessions that didn't involve a switch back to the old format. Their proposal consisted of every driver setting only 2 flying laps in each session, with the times from both laps being added up to create an aggregate lap time, similar to the format they had in the first 6 races of 2005 when they had the one-shot qualifying format. The aggregate time would then be used to determine the order of each session, and also determine who would advance into the next session and who would be eliminated. This proposal would have a mixed response from the drivers, with many calling it stupid, whilst others believed it was better than the current format they had. But with a majority not agreeing to it, the proposal was ultimately scrapped, and after an overwhelming amount of pressure from many people in the F1 circle, the FIA eventually bit the bullet, and announced 4 days after the Bahrain Grand Prix that the elimination format had been scrapped with immediate effect, and that they would revert back to the previous format that was last used in 2015. F1 continues to use this qualifying format to this very day, with the format still proving to be very popular amongst fans, with memories of the elimination format long forgotten. But the implementation of such a format will still go down as one of the most embarrassing moments in the sport's history, along with a long line of things they have done since then. It's another example of a change that was completely botched, especially with how last minute the format was implemented, and also a change that was completely unnecessary and one that no one asked for, especially given there was nothing wrong with the format they had. The FIA did need to change something to improve the sport, but they went about it in completely the wrong way, as instead of trying to do something to improve the action on Sunday, they instead went about trying to fix something that wasn't even broken in the first place. And when it ended up not working the way they intended it to be, they ended up having egg on their face. Thankfully, while still not perfect, the sport nowadays has finally managed to find a way to improve its competitiveness thanks to the introduction of a cost cap and also rules regarding hours in the wind tunnel. But it's just a shame that it took the sport half a decade to work that out, and the embarrassment that was the elimination qualifying, whilst long forgotten, will still leave a lingering scar in the years to come.